What's up, everyone? Grayson the Dean 22 on Nichols here, as always, on the Elite Rounders YouTube channel, and we are back finally with round 2 of the duel, pitting Mr. White Magic Hellmuth against Daniel Negreanu. And I'm going to say this match was way better than the first one. Thought the first one was pretty boring, a lot of small ball. Hellmuth didn't play very well, even despite winning. Yes, I heard it from all of you Hellmuth fans in the chat. I really love when you guys come at me when I give Mr. White Magic a tough time. But he really did not show up in the first match. It was not impressive. However, I will give you guys your due. He played way better in this battle. And Daniel played kind of the same, and I think this was a mistake by Daniel. In poker, we always talk about how adjusting is the most important thing. If you don't adjust and adapt, you're going to be left behind, right? So I think Phil, credit to where credit is deserved. I believe he played much better. He was bluffing a ton in this match, still doing an unorthodox limp strategy, which I recommend for you all when you're playing heads up to be raising as much as you can on your buttons. Don't try to emulate this strategy at home, but I'll give credit to the man. He did a lot better in this match, and let's just hop right in and talk about some of the hands. Usually we talk about one hand on our recap video, but today I marked 4 in particular that I thought were pretty interesting that I just really wanted to talk about with you guys. I'm going to briefly touch on the first 3, and then we'll get a little more in-depth on the final hand, and I'll try to hold the spoilers till the end so you guys don't have to know exactly what happened for those of you who didn't watch the 6-hour battle last night. So this hand was kind of interesting. Daniel opened on the button, as always, with jacks. Phil defended with 6-4 suited, really standard in both ways. Flop came out 10-6-3. Phil hits middle pair, backdoor straight draw, and Daniel has the overpair. Daniel goes ahead and c-bets. Phil calls, standard. And on the turn, Daniel spikes the nuts with top set. He bets again, and Phil calls again, which I think is reasonable. However, I do think this is a major inflection point. When you make a call on a turn like this, with a hand like middle pair, I guess second to bottom pair at this point, you need to plan for the river, right? And if the river was to be a blank, right? And on this board, oddly, a blank would be like an offsuit king even, right? If that's the river and Daniel bets again, Phil really needs to consider calling with his 6. All of the straight draws that were out there missed, whether it's 7, 8, 8, 9, 4, 5, 5, 7, all of those would have missed in the instance of like a king or a blank on the river. So if Daniel bets again, Phil would have to call. And if Phil's not comfortable calling on a blank there, I'd highly recommend just, nipping in the bud and folding on the turn before you get yourself into that precarious spot. So that's just a little tip for you guys. Plan ahead. Always be one street ahead in these spots. The turn was not a blank in this case, and it was 2 pair for Phil, leading to what was a really interesting series of events afterward. Daniel went ahead and bet again, 3 streets straight, just betting the whole way with the perceived nuts. Now, obviously, 5, 7, and 2, 5 get there. Highly unlikely holdings. So Daniel bets 15,000. And Phil goes ahead, 13,000. And then Phil goes ahead and raises him 15K, up to 28K. This felt kind of thin by Phil. I think it's reasonable, though, and good for him for stepping outside of his comfort zone a little bit. I think that he's been very, careful and conservative in some of these spots and almost always calling in situations where he has the goods. Here, I believe he could target things like ace-jack from Daniel, maybe king-jack, but honestly, that's about it. I'm not really sure what else he expects Daniel to call with that's worse than his lowly 2 pair. I do like the idea of going for value when a flush draw misses, because the idea is that you could be bluffing your missed flush draw. But Hellmuth doesn't do that a ton, so I don't think it really makes as much sense for him here. And Daniel makes an excellent re-raise, I would say. He goes in and puts in a 3-bet to 43K, so 15,000 more. And he really gets thin value from Hellmuth here, who goes ahead and sighs and calls and pays off Daniel. I get the vibe that Daniel might have folded if Phil moved all in, kind of just crediting him for the 5-7, something like 5-7 of clubs, 2-5 of clubs maybe. But who knows? We have no idea if he was going to do that, because that is kind of a tough spot for Daniel when Phil, who doesn't raise a lot, suddenly puts out a raise with this sort of line. It would strike me as a spot where, he might have a straight or he might be bluffing a lot, and like I said, he doesn't bluff a ton. So I could see how this would be a spot where even with something as strong as a set, Negreanu and some players might just call, but he makes a good value raise, especially knowing that maybe Phil has a smaller set, So this was an interesting one, and gave Daniel a pretty healthy chip lead early on. So the next spot that I found really interesting was this ace-jack against ace-6 battle. And Daniel, again, opens pre, Hellmuth calls, and there was 6K in the pot on the flop. The flop comes out monotone, jack high, so Daniel hits top pair, top kicker, and Phil's got the nut flush draw. So this is where things get a little weird. Phil just leads out for 7K in this spot over pot. Nick Schulman very kindly mentioned on the commentary that there's not many hands that would make sense to do this with. Also, as I was speaking with one of my students earlier, he pointed out that if you watch Phil's game, it's pretty obvious he would never bet that big with a flush. So I'm not wild about his over bet there. But I think where it gets really interesting is that Daniel check called the flop. And Daniel leads out on the turn for 3,000 into a 20K pot. Not sure I like this bet. A bet like that looks really weak, and it almost begs to get raised. And I'm not sure Daniel wants to get raised in this spot either, right? I think when you have ace-jack on this sort of board, you want to try to get to the river, cheap at this point. There is a chance you could have an 8. There is a chance you could have a flush, and you need to fade a number of bad rivers as well. So most notably clubs. So I'm not sure I like Daniel's lead there. Curious what he was thinking in that spot. Sure enough, Phil raises it up to 22K. I think I dig the play by Phil. It looks like Daniel's doing some sort of weird blocker bet. And I think going ahead and, taking his equity and turning it into a semi-bluff makes a ton of sense, hoping that he can hit the river in position. I dig the play by Phil. I think it makes a lot of sense. And the river comes out a 10 of diamonds. Phil misses this flush, Daniel checks, and Phil checks back. This was an interesting one, too, where, a part of me was thinking that this would be a reasonable spot for Phil just to empty the clip. He was bluffing a lot more last night than he was in the first match. So I think that, a lot of his bluffs seemed very, I'd say, sporadic and random, like he would just go 3 barrels at different spots, maybe because he felt like it. Maybe he has some physical tells on Daniel as well, not too sure. But I think based on, his ace of clubs blocker and the line that he took here, it would be a very compelling spot just to triple barrel all in, right? He'd really be repping a flush and put Daniel in a tough spot with basically anything, right? So I thought this hand was pretty close as well, very interesting. Daniel must have been really happy just to take down that pot. Then we got this hand, the 7s versus a7. So this was one of the rare 3-bets pre-flop for Mr. Hellmuth. It's like a rare bird out in the forest or something that you run across very rarely. His random 3-bets, the guy will slow play jacks till the end of time, but then randomly 3-bets with 10 deuce suited or a7. No, don't get me wrong. I think those hands make a lot of sense to be in your 3-bet range. 3-bet bluff range. However, it's typically more in a range that is, balanced out by a fair amount of value hands, right? So I think he has a very imbalanced 3-bet strategy that's all over the place. And honestly, I think it seems like it's based a lot on emotion. They were joking during the game, Schulman and Ali Najad, the commentators, were saying how Hellmuth was zooming. He would basically go moments where he'd be really tight, and then something would click, and he would just start playing really fast and aggressive. And honestly, it was working for him. It was working most of the time, too. So this was another one of those. This hand's pretty wild. And Daniel opens the button to 4K with 7s. Phil 3-bet to 14 with a7. I like the play. Makes a lot of sense. That's a perfect hand to move over into your 3-bet bluff range. Flop comes out king 3-5. Phil's got the backdoor nut flush draw, backdoor straight draw, and Daniel's got the middle pair, second pair. So I think it's a pretty good flop for both. Hellmuth goes ahead and c-bets. Daniel calls, standard. Turns the 4 of spades here, so they both pick up a little extra equity. And this is where Phil makes a very interesting sizing bet, which I actually like. Again, I think it makes a ton of sense. He goes ahead and he bets 30K with only 20K back. This to me indicates that he's never folding, right? Which I get the vibe that he would have folded if Daniel moved all in here. And it really puts Daniel in the blender with almost anything. Even if Daniel's sitting here with like king 10, like I feel like he'd be really worried and he wouldn't really feel comfortable moving all in, wouldn't feel very comfortable just calling either too. So I thought this was an unusual bet sizing, but it very effective, you know? So I thought this was another smooth move by Hellmuth. You know, White Magic just really in action. I did give him a hard time because he had pocket aces about 5 times during this heads up, which, you know, some people might say luck, others might say White Magic, right? Either way, you know, he did well with each of these hands, so I am impressed nonetheless. Daniel sure enough folded the 7s, you know, another huge pot for Phil. This was a big one because he was trailing behind, and he regained the chip lead in this spot. So this is what sets the stage rather for one of the last hands they played, and a very interesting one. And I believe this was the inflection point of the entire match too. So Daniel opens the button with 9-7 of diamonds, which is standard, and Phil, like I mentioned, throws in his 3-bet with the 10 deuce of diamonds, which I am okay with. I think a hand like this is definitely on the bottom end of your calling range. Move it over to your 3-bet bluff range. We like to do that with a lot of suited cards. I dig it. So the flop comes out king 6-6, 1 diamond, 2 spades. Both of them essentially miss. Phil c-bets, which I like, and Daniel floats. I like the float by Daniel a lot. I think there's a lot of hands that Phil can bet flop with. Ace queen, ace jack, even things like jacks and queens, right? That Daniel might be able to take him off his hand on decent runouts or later streets. So I like the play by both here, and we get the action turn of all turns here with this 8 of diamonds. Hellmuth fires again, and Daniel just calls. And I think this is the spot where Daniel messed up. And, you know, again, I mentioned this earlier. I don't think Daniel adjusted as well. Like, I do think Daniel is the better heads-up player. He's had a lot of practice against Doug Polk, the best heads-up player in the world. But I think Daniel didn't adapt and adjust well in this one. I think he played Phil kind of the way that Phil played in Game 1, right? But Phil didn't play the same in Game 2 as Game 1. He was bluffing quite a bit in this match. So I think Daniel needs to adjust a bit more to the new Phil, new Phil in this spot, right? And so I kind of would have liked to see Daniel jam over Phil's bet on the turn here. I think it's a spot where Phil does have a fair amount of double barrels. You know, he gets very sticky with his double barrels. He kind of, you know, bets once or doesn't bet at all, or he goes 3 times, it seems, right? So I do think there's a number of weak holdings that Phil could be probing with and just, you know, taking a double barrel approach in this spot. And so this would be a great spot for Daniel, I think, just to rip it in with 50,000 already in the middle. And if he does run into a king, so be it. He's got all the outs in the world, right? He's got this open-ended straight flush draw. So I do think this is a spot where Daniel kind of missed a key situation. He just calls with the 9-7 suited. The river is a 9, giving Daniel the best hand. But Mr. White Magic, baby, he puts it all in like that. Doesn't even think. Sees the river hit, moves all in immediately. And Daniel folds pretty quickly as well. You know, I think to myself, like, what exactly is Hellmuth repping in this spot? I mean, I guess like aces, ace king, maybe. Like even ace king feels like almost a thin shove in Phil Hellmuth's shoes. You know, I think this is one thing where he might be slightly imbalanced, where his bluff lines are in some polarizing spots where he can't rep a ton of value, like this one in particular, because we've seen him be very careful with some of his value hands. But kudos to Phil. This was a huge bluff that got through and ultimately propelled Mr. White Magic to the second victory. So I had to eat my words once again. To all you Hellmuth stands out there, please let me hear in the comments. Rip me away. I will give your guy credit. He did much better this time. He earned this win for sure. Granted, he did get really lucky on the final hand with ace-4 against pocket 8s, but that's neither here nor there. Sorry, I'm a little bitter still, you can see. But I do give credit to the man. I think he played much better in this one. And I'm kind of excited because at least we get a third round for sure. And the stakes will be upped again. I'm not sure exactly how much they'll be playing for, but I believe it goes up double every time. So we're going to be playing for some real high stakes in the third match. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I sure as hell enjoyed watching this battle between two poker legends and amazing personalities. And I'm really excited for the third one. And yes, I will be betting again on Daniel. And you guys can just give it to me because I definitely deserve it. Congrats to Phil Hellmuth. Hell of a match. And I can't wait for the third one. Check out the rest of our content at the Elite Rounders YouTube channel. And I'll see you guys next week as always. Peace.